Hello, Namaskar, and Tashdele to everybody. Today we are going to talk about a subject which is very close to the heart of uh, Tibetan people, the Friends of Tibet, and even the Communist government of People's Republic of China. The issue is that Tibet has never been a part of China, which is very much contrary to what Chinese government has been claiming, going to the rooftop and to shout to all those countries who hardly have much interest in Tibet, but it wants the whole world to acknowledge and endorse that Tibet has been always a part of China. That eagerness of China makes it more interesting even to those people who would have hardly any interest in the subject. So, today, why we are discussing this subject is because today is the eve of the anniversary, which is 109th anniversary of the proclamation of Tibetan independence, which happened in 1913, and it was 13th Dalai Lama of Tibet who made this proclamation, and he had to make this proclamation that because for a short while the Manchu army had invaded Tibet, and because of that the Dalai Lama had to flee for his safety for some time to Mongolia. But very soon, the Tibetan army pushed out the Chinese, and Dalai Lama returned to Tibet, to a free Tibet. And to put it on record, he had to make a formal proclamation of Tibetan independence. And that was done on 13th February 1913. And that's why today we are meeting and discussing this subject about the independence and free status of Tibet. We have this evening is being organized by two organizations: the Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement and the Tibetan Youth Congress. These two organizations are very keenly engaged in their own ways of understanding Tibet, understanding China, and the Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement is mainly focused on understanding the issues related to Himalayan Asian countries, and especially those countries which are around China, around Tibet, and around India. So today we have with us uh, very learned speakers. One is Mr. Claude Arpi, who is a very famous Tibetologist, a historian about who has understood and written a lot about the history of Tibet. He is of French origin, settled in India, in Auroville. He is author of many books and about, especially about Tibet. His understanding of history of Tibet, especially vis-a-vis China and India, is very outstanding. I will be not overstepping my responsibility if I show you the book, the latest book Claude RP has written. It's the fourth volume. It's a set of four books which he has written on India, Tibet, and China. So, if anybody is interested in understanding this triangle, China, Tibet, and India, I think Claude RP is the right man, and his book is the right document to go through. And Claude RP is a blogger, a very famous blogger who is writing very regularly for many years, and he is a proficient speaker. His articles on, especially on environment and rivers of Tibet, have attracted international attention. Then we have Mr. Thupten Sampel, who is a very prominent Tibetan scholar. He is the first executive director, the founding executive director of Tibet Policy Institute in Dharamsala. He has been the secretary of Department of Information and International Relations of the Tibetan Government in Exile and CTA. He is a product of Indian education system. He had his schooling as a refugee child in Kalimpong. He did his graduation and post graduation in from Delhi University, from the St. Stephen's College, and then he went on to United States of America. He was among the first group of those Tibetan young Tibetans who were selected for Fulbright scholarship. So he had his degree of journalism from Columbia University, and he had the privilege of traveling to Tibet as a refugee when a dialogue between Dalai Lama and China government started, and five delegations went to Tibet. So he was a member of the last fifth fact-finding mission to Tibet in 1985. He is author of quite a few books. One famous book is Falling Through Roof, and his latest book, The Copper Mountain. It's a He has written, this is Copper Mountain is actually the real story of life inside Tibet, but written in fiction style. So if you want to understand the life of Tibetan people, the climate change Tibet is facing at the hands of occupying Chinese government, this book would be of interest to you. And we had a third speaker, Tenzin Zochbauer, a very prominent Tibet activist, and she is the executive director of Tibet Initiative Deutschland in Germany at Berlin. Unfortunately, she had some health problem last evening, and she is unable to join. But as we wish her early recovery, we hope that in one of our upcoming webinars, she will be with us, and we will have the privilege of listening to her. And in our audience, we have a very special guest, uh, Madam Dolmagari. She is she's minister in the current Tibetan government, Minister of Security. So I welcome Dolmagari ji and all our audience. So coming to our subject, uh, Tibet has never been a part of China. I would leave the floor to our friend, Mr. Claude RP. Claude, the floor is yours. Yes, please. It seems there is some link problem with Mr. Claude RP. So, would it be hello, Mr. Claude RP? Are you available on the link? So anyhow, I hope he will be able to join us because it seems that he has some connectivity problem. Uh, Mr. Thupten Sampel, may I request you, Mr. Thupten Sampel, can you please take the floor, and after you will request Claude RP. I'm sure by that time he would have got his connection.
Right. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you very, very much. And I would like to thank you and the Tibetan Youth Congress for giving us the opportunity to hold this conference on an issue which is pertinent and relevant to all of us. And when I thought about the uh, conference topic, I thought, why are we having this conference at all? Because for the Tibetan people, by sentiment, by our upbringing, culture, We've always thought the Chinese were different. China was another country, and Tibet was another country and culture. So, for this opportunity, I express my very deep appreciation. At the same time, I would like to point out what somebody else has pointed out. The 13th Dalai Lama just did not proclaim Tibetan independence. He reaffirmed the independence status of Tibet. So, what Tibet was something which the 13th Dalai Lama reaffirmed. So, this is a very important point. Now, coming back to our relations with China, I have picked on two important points. Are mm, Tibet's most active, engaged, and productive activity took place during the reign of the Tibetan emperors from the 6th to the 9th century. During this period, the Tibetan kings, successive Tibetan kings, unified the whole of Tibet. So this unified realm engaged in relations with two great civilizations and cultures. One is India, and the other is China. So, with India, the Tibetans were mainly engaged in transmitting the wisdom of Buddhists in India to Tibet. So, this transmission took place about 5, 6 centuries, from the 6th to the 9th century. And this complete transmission of Tibetan Buddhism changed Tibetan character, how we look at life, and our whole worldview. On the other hand, from the 6th to the 9th century, the Tibetan emperors engaged with China, and this engagement was mainly with territorial disputes. Uh, and one of the clear indications is that one of the Tang emperors gave his princess to Songtsen Gampo as a bride, and at the same time, the Tunghua Caves documents reveal that I think during the time of Tisun Desert in the 7th or 8th century, I don't remember exactly, Tibetans were able to engage the Chinese imperial force and expel the emperor and his forces from the capital of Tang China, which is present day Xi'an. And Xi'an is these days in the news because of the virus grip on the whole of the city. So anyway, the Tibetans occupied the Tang capital for 15 long days. After that, the Chinese Tang imperial troops regrouped and expelled the Tibetans from their capital. So this is the kind of engagement uh, unified Tibet had with uh, China. And on the other hand, as I've said, with the great civilization, culture in the south, with India, we were mainly transmitting, understanding, studying the whole body of the Buddhist work uh, in Sanskrit, and later this whole wisdom was translated uh, from Sanskrit or Pali into Tibetan. So this was our relationship with Tang China. So in this relationship, I mean, there was no doubt that Tibet operated as an equal and sometimes as a dominating force in Central Asian relations. I think the complication came during the time of the Mongols and then later on with the Manchus. With the Mongols, the first kingdom they attacked and subdued was the Tangut Empire. They were either Tibetan speaking people or somehow related to the Tibetans. So, anyway, they operated a big empire in south of Mongolia. So, the first kingdom attacked by Genghis Khan, probably in 1227, I think, if I'm right, was the Tanguts. And this empire was totally destroyed. And the, the great Ven scholar Tessering says that the remaining Tangut people, they either escaped to places like Sikkim, Nepal. For example, people in northern Nepal, they are called Sherpas, those who came from the east. So this is a trace of the great dispersal of the Tanguts. And the Tanguts are known by Tibetans as Minyak and by the Chinese as the Shisha people. So this was a great attack by the Mongol forces. And later on, they came to Tibet. The Tibetan Lamas, at that time, there was no unified central political authority in Tibet. And it was the Tibetan Lamas who, by their spiritual learning and mastery of Buddhism, was the dominant force to which the Tibetan people looked up to. So they wisely surrendered to the Mongol forces, and all the places which was dominated, conquered by the Mongols, Tibet was the only country which was left alone. The Mongols came to Tibet to every year to collect taxes. As long as the Tibetans paid their taxes, the Mongols left Tibet very much to itself. So this was, and the argument, Tibet's relations with Mongolia is complicated by the attempt by Chinese revisionist historians to say that since Mongolia brought Tibet under its imperial control. By right, present day China had every reason to say Tibet has always been part of China, and since politically since the Mongol times. But anyway, the relationship between Tibet and Mongolia, and especially during the time of Sakya Pandita, I think he was invited by Kublai Khan to be his imperial preceptor, and he left, excuse me, his nephew, Dogen Chögyam Pakpa, in the Kublai Khan's court. So at that time, Tibetan Buddhism became a court religion of the Mongol Khans. And later on, during the third Dalai Lama's time, he was responsible for converting the whole of Mongolia into Tibetan Buddhism. So Buddhism became the dominant spiritual force of both the Mongol court and then later on with the people of Mongolia. So this was our relationship with the Mongols. And as I've said, what the Mongols have done, the way the Mongols established their relationship with Tibet was distorted, misinterpreted by present day Chinese historians to say that uh, Mongolia or Mongol China enjoyed dominant political force in in Tibet. And our next chapter in Tibet's relationship was with the Manchus. Like the Mongols, the Manchus were also Buddhists, and they had this special relationship with the Dalai Lamas of Tibet. It is defined as priest-patron relationship. Uh, the priests in this concept were the Dalai Lamas of Tibet, their responsibility was to provide spiritual ministry to the Manchus and their court. And the responsibility of the Manchu court was to protect the realm of their priests. And this relationship again was distorted by present day Chinese scholars to say that by virtue of the fact that Mongols had this kind of relationship, Tibet had always been part of China. As far as Jiang Zemin, the mm, he told some of his advisors to say that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times, when time began. So this kind of ridiculous distortion of Tibetan history is an extent of the nervousness of the Chinese to continue to hold onto Tibet. Then one thing which I forgot during the imperial Tibetan days was the Tibetan occupation of the Silk Road. Historians say Tibetans held and controlled the Silk Road. Silk Road, as you know, is a commercial and educational link between the West and the East. Commerce, trade, and ideas uh, flourish or made their way along this remarkable ancient road. So Tibetans were able to uh, occupy this for 50 years. And Road was a very profitable business because a lot of merchandise, commerce, and anyone who occupied was able to grab hold of the goods which traverse on this ancient highway. And let me see. And jumping back to Tibet's relations with the Manchus was that since the whole of Mongolia was converted to Buddhism by the third Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lamas of Tibet had a very strong, not political, but spiritual influence in Mongolia. And the problem the Manchu Empire faced was the constant harassment of the empire by the Mongols. So, with the priest patron relationship, the Manchu empress expected the Dalai Lamas of Tibet to hold back the Mongols from harassing, attacking, or pillaging uh, the villages in lowland China. So, this was uh, sort of relations Tibet had with its neighbors. And the biggest complication came during the time of the British Raj. So at the time, the British were concerned about this expanding Tsarist Russian influence into Central Asia, and later on, they feared that Tsarist Russia would find its hold in Tibet, and that thus damage British interests in India. So they sent this young husband expedition to Tibet in 1903-4-5. As a result, as Vijay pointed out, the 13th Dalai Lama escaped, sought mm, refuge, sanctuary in Mongolia, and later on, at the court of the Manchu Empress, the last Manchu Empress. So, with the British, their uh, interpretation of this huge geopolitical space in Central Asia or Northern Asia was that Tibet was a buffer and that no big powers, including Russia, China, should increase its influence in Tibet. And the British would see that this would not happen, and thus the outcome of the young husband expedition to Tibet. And one thing which harmed Tibet's distinct assertion of its identity was the way uh, the British India muddled Tibet's mm, status. They, they somehow gave to the international community the impression that China had some kind of influence in Tibet, and this influence was not sovereign, but suzerain right of the uh, suzerain over Tibet. But Tibet, for all practical purposes, enjoyed internal administration. And this kind of sort of reinterpretation and distortion of Tibet's status was defined by Lord Curzon as a constitutional fiction. He said this constitutional fiction that China had some kind of right over Tibet was maintained by both parties, China and the British, because it suited the interests of the two parties to somehow prevent Russian Tsarist Russian hold uh, uh, over Tibet. So this is the kind of international politics exerting and distorting Tibet's independence identity. And as I've said, by sentiment, by the way we look at China, by the way we see ourselves as a different culture, civilization, uh, we feel in our very bones that we were separate from China. We had a different way we look at the world, shaped fundamentally by our Buddhist upbringing. So I think I came to the end of my talk. I'll stop here, and I'm sure Claude RP has recovered from his slight technological hiccup, and I'm here to learn a lot from Claude. And by the way, thank you so much for this opportunity to meet old friends. And I express my deep appreciation to Kalwin Kerutuma and wish her every success in her new responsibilities. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Thupen Sampella. As we were expecting from a scholar like you have, in very simple language, presented the real status of Tibet through history, and especially the way you have underlined how China is trying to rewrite history by claiming that the influence of Mongols over Tibet amounts to Tibet being a part of China, and then which looks very funny that China, which itself was under occupation of the Mongols and Manchus and suffered very badly, today claims that its occupation of Mongolia by Mongolia, occupation of China means that Tibet is a part of China. Of course, it is as good as if today India claims that because all the colonies of Britain around the world are today now parts of India. It amounts to like that. Or maybe New Zealand tomorrow says that India is a part of New Zealand because both were ruled by the British. So anyhow, it's a laughable interpretation by the Chinese, but unfortunately today, when China is holding so much of economic power, political power, and military power, uh, surely they are going to play so many jokes like that. Now I come to our friend Claude RP. Unfortunately, there was a some connectivity problem. So let us hope that we this problem won't be there. And Claude RP, we are very keen to listen to you, Claude.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's hope for the best for the connectivity problem and for the slide. So, the slides are not coming. Yes. First of all, thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Gomulat, to invite me. Uh, that is a very good topic. And you mentioned that is important for Tibet, but I think it's very important for India. And I will come to it. I will go more on that side to show how it's important for India and for its border. Um, so uh, just I want to say also that Vijay show one of my book, but I worked 4 years to publish these 4 books on the India-Tibet relation between 1947 and 62, because in 47, when it started my story, Tibet was independent, and slowly Tibet lost its independence. And in 1962, the Indian Consulate General in Lhasa was closed on December 15. It was the end of that old relation which lasted for centuries. Now, what is independent state? In international law, a state is a sovereign when the treaty concluded by that state are ipso facto, means in fact concluded by the vassal state. So it means that if China concludes a treaty, that treaty is also valid for Tibet, which was not the case. If a war of a sovereign is ipso facto a war of the vassal, for example, China went to war with Japan, but it didn't. Tibet never went to war with Japan, so it was clearly legally proof that Tibet was an independent state. Now, a Tibet sovereign state must have a defined territory, which uh, Tibet had with the three provinces, Amdo, Kham, and Lutsen. Must have a government. Government, he had the Kashag and also a national assembly, the Tsongdu. And more importantly, maybe the capacity to enter foreign relations with other recognized states. Now, Tibet, at least in the 20th century, had the Foreign Bureau, which is equivalent to the Ministry of External Affairs for India, and had regular contact with the appointee of the government of India in Lhasa. And after 1936, there was a consulate general in Lhasa, a full-fledged mission, sorry. And so this foreign bureau, until the Chinese came and dissolved it, that foreign bureau was running the foreign affairs of Tibet. So it showed that Tibet was independent. Now, second slide, I don't know, that slide has gone also, some technical. Uh, can you, I don't know, the slide is not coming. Okay. Do you see the slides, Vijay? I see you, but I don't see the slides. As Tupten Sabala mentioned that Tibet was a huge buffer zone between, and some people say buffer is not a nice word. I think buffer may or may not be a nice word, but it was very useful, and there was no war between Tibet and between China and India for centuries because there was that huge landmass. Now, what are the signs of independent state? Tibet had its own flag. Tibet had its own passport. Tibet had its own stamps, postal service, which were run by India till 1955, has its own currency note, and had signed treaties like in 1913 with Mongolia. So, in fact, legally, Tibet had all the sign of an independent state, but unfortunately, they don't have the muscle to prove it or to keep that in independence. Um, in between for 6 months, 1913, 1914, there was a conference called by the British to settle the border between China and Tibet. There was never been a problem between India and Tibet. That border was peaceful. There was no army. There was not a single policeman also for 2 centuries. But there was a big problem between China and Tibet border. So the British called conference in Shimla and for 6 months negotiated. So I put this slide showing that actually that is a proceeding of the many meetings which took place and which ended by the convention in July. But it shows present Sir Henry McMahon, who was the Foreign Secretary of British India, Monsieur Ivan Chen, the Chinese plenipotentiary, and Kusho Lochen Chatra, who was the Prime Minister of Tibet and the representative of His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama. So they are on the same level. So now China can say whatever they want. They can publish hundreds of white paper, but the fact these proceedings of the remains, and it shows that for 6 months the Chinese representative was sitting on the same level that Lochen Chatra and Henry McMahon. This result during the Shimla conference, actually without really taking the Chinese on board, India and Tibet settled their own border. And on this McMahon line map, you see the seal of Lochen Chatra and his signature, as well as Sir Henry McMahon. Now, that border is a northeastern border of India till today. So if you say that Tibet has never been independent, that border doesn't exist. Of course, China has always called the illegal McMahon line or the so-called McMahon line. But the fact is that even in in Bandung, for example, when Chuen Lai met Nehru, he said, "I have no problem with that line. I have a problem with the name. McMahon is a colonialist name, but he had no border." And the fact that in November of 1962, the PLA withdrew on the north of this border means that China has still no issue with it, though they have an issue with Tibetan independence. Now, during this border agreement, the border agreement was sent to Lhasa, to the 13th Dalai Lama, who gave his agreement, and finally Lochen Chatra signed, and with two conditions. One, some private estate in the area called Menchuka Manikang today in India. The Lalu, one aristocrat, had some private estate, they would not be disturbed. But China has never raised that issue because, of course, they don't want to formalize or to recognize the McMahon line. And the second very interesting is the Sari Roncor, the pilgrimage, which was taken place every 12 years. The line would not follow exactly the watershed like it followed for the rest of the border. So India agrees that in that case there would be some adjustment. Otherwise, the entire line follows the watershed, and it was agreed by both parties in India and Tibet, and it remains the border. So Tibet was an independent state with a capacity of signing agreement that still today India recognizes. Soon after the Shimla Convention, the war took place, and many people in London or in Delhi forgot, even in Lhasa, forgot about the convention. Of course, China didn't ratify the convention. They only initially So in 1929, the treaty, the agreement of Shimla was published in the Treaties and Engagement and Sanat by they called the Hsson treaties. So it says, whereas the Shimla Convention itself, after being initiated by the Chinese plenipotentiary, was not signed or ratified by the Chinese government, it was accepted as a binding by the two parties, Tibet and India, as a between themselves. So it means by 1929, clearly British India acknowledged that Tibet was independent and had signed that agreement. Excuse me. I found in the National Archives in Delhi very interesting note in 1945. The maintenance of Tibet buffer is a matter of utmost importance for India from the point of view of defense and interests of India's internal administration. The British were good strategists. They understood all the implication, strategic implication, and defense security implication, and they knew that line was very important and that autonomy or independence of Tibet should be preserved. Tibet should enjoy internal autonomy and the right to conduct its directly foreign relations, recognizing China's sovereignty by more or less ceremonial formalities. Sambola mentioned Lord Curzon, so it's more or less the same formula. And support for Tibetan autonomy should be by the strongest and most outspoken diplomatic pressure. So it means that just before, at the end of the war, soon India would be independent. The British recognized that Tibet was independent or had absolute internal autonomy, and this should not be disturbed in the interest of British India. You all know about the Asian Relation Conference. The map published, Tibet is the flag of Tibet was on the days, and the delegates, Tibetan delegates, met Gandhi, Nehru, Sarojini Naidu, and all the Indian leaders who assured them at that time, it was 6 months before India's independence, that they would recognize Tibet independence. And just you know that on June 3rd of 1947, the Lord Mountbatten decided or announced that the British India would leave the subcontinent, and ultimately the subcontinent will be divided into dominion. So at that time, the Delhi wrote a letter to Lhasa, and they asked for the confirmation of the treaty, means the Shimla Convention, means the McMahon line between India and Tibet. And they said the intention of the government of India to continue relation on the existing basis until new arrangement reached on the matter by either party or may wish to be taken up. So first, Tibet had to acknowledge that they had a treaty with British India or India, and later on, if they wanted to renegotiate some part, it was a possibility. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, the Kashak sat on the file for 11 months. That was one, that is more than a blunder. We speak sometimes about Himalayan blunder, but that was very, very bad from the Kashak for its own reason, because mainly, I think, the Kalon didn't understand the implication for Tibet of not recognizing immediately that Shimla Convention and the McMahon line. If they had recognized immediately, maybe the thing would have been different, but we cannot, it's very difficult to say. I mean, we cannot rewrite the past, but that was really a blunder at that time. In 1943, the Chinese minister in London had asked the British government, what is your views on the status of Tibet? At that time, the British said that since Chinese revolution of 1911, 2 years before the declaration of independence of His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama, when Chinese forces are withdrawn from Tibet, Tibet has de facto enjoyed de facto independence. And now there was a long text. In 1949, means 6 years after that legal opinion given to the Chinese, the British Parliament voted. There was a question in the Parliament and there was a vote, and they voted for the same text. So it means that 2 years after India became independent, still British India fully recognized the status of Tibet as an independent state. Now, we all know that in the October of 1950, the Chinese, the Second Field Army from Sichuan, the First Field Army from Shanghai, walked into Tibet, and the 18th Army mainly occupied Chamdo very soon after. By 17th of October 1950, Chamdo was occupied, and Governor Nabo Nawang Jingmei was taken prisoner of war and taken to Beijing. Now, the government of India, many people realized what was happening. Either they had been trained by the British, like Sir Girja Shankar Bajpai, who was at that time General Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Commonwealth. At that time, there's one Foreign Secretary and one Commonwealth Secretary, and above there was a General Secretary. Now, Bajpai made a draft letter that Sardar Patel sent on the 7th of November 1950 to Nehru. And this 7 pages letter, he gave good detail about the importance for India to have an independent Tibet. And he mentioned the NIFA, the Northeast Frontier Agency, and all what it would mean if China is invaded. You all know about that letter, and it would also danger for Nepal, Sikkim, which at that time was independent, and Bhutan was independent. Now, when I was working on the first volume on my book, who covers that era, I had met several times Sir Girja Shankar Bajpai's son, late Ambassador K.S. Bajpai, who had been later ambassador in the US and Pakistan. And he told me the story. One day, Nehru met Bajpai in the corridor of South Block and told him, "You're marshalling the big shots with Tibet." So Bajpai could not say anything, but it meant practically that Bajpai had sent that draft to President Rajendra Prasad, to Raja Gopalachari, to K.M. Munshi, and many of the senior leaders of the Congress. Now, all of them, of course, including Sardar Patel, who sent officially the letter to Nehru because it had more weight if it come from the Deputy Prime Minister than if it come from the General Secretary. Most of the leaders at least the most important leaders in November of 1950 in India believed that Tibet was independent and that independence should be preserved. And they were very clear that Sardar K.M. Panikkar, the ambassador of India in Beijing, had been very brainwashed by Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai used to give parties very late at night to Panikkar, and as a result, someone who in 1948 had written that Tibet was independent. At that time, he was ambassador to nationalist China in Nanjing. In 1950, decided to give away Tibet and advised the prime minister. You have to realize that Prime Minister Nehru not only was enamored of China, but his main objective, if you go through this selected work of General Nehru, this 85 volume, his main objective was to avoid war. So he was ready to any compromise to avoid war. And the major compromise he did, it was on India's security in accepting the takeover. So next slide. As I mentioned on the first slide, the fact to have a foreign relation, independent foreign relation with another country is best proof of independence. And till 1952, India had a full-fledged mission. And Panikkar, after 2 years serving in Beijing, before being transferred in Cairo as ambassador, he insisted that we should not have a full-fledged, India should not have a full-fledged mission. It should be downgraded to a consulate general. I think the day it was accepted by the prime minister, and by the way, it was never presented in the parliament, it was never discussed. Very few of the collaborators of Nehru knew about it, but the full-fledged Indian mission, which meant that Tibet was independent, was downgraded on August 15, 1952. I think Mr. Shomul Sinha, who had been the head of the mission, was quite disgusted, and he objected to it, and he left, and he was replaced by Mr. Ekesen, an IFS officer. But I think it was the end of Tibet as an independent state, at least vis-a-vis of India. You can see the Kilinka, the residence of the head of the mission and later the consul general, and the Indian flag floating over the Kilinka. It remained there till 1962. And today, India has no consulate general, no representation in Tibet. And though the Ministry of External Affairs from time to time have been asking, I think not very boldly, not very strong manner, but I've asked Chinese, they have refused, while Nepal has a very big consulate general, and even Lhasa, the Chinese government offered them a new building recently. So that day of 52, I think that was the end. And the last nail in the coffin was the Panchil Agreement. If you ask the old generation of Indian diplomats, they will say Panchil was the best thing Nehru did. And I fought with many of them. I think that was the biggest blunder. It was more than a blunder. One of my books is called The Panchil Agreement, Born in Sin. That's the word that Acharya Kripalani used in Parliament. It was really a sin, because the entire agreement is about giving away all the rights that India had in Tibet, including the postal services, the telegraph services, and the 12 dark bungalow, very beautiful residence for the people traveling to Lhasa. That was really a blunder, because you have to realize that till 1954, till the Panchil, Indian could travel freely to Tibet. There was no question of registration or passport or any papers. Anybody, pilgrims going to Kailash Mansarovar, traders going to Yatong, Gyanse. In Yatong, there was up to 150 shops, mainly manned by Mawali people from Calcutta. They had shop, you could find anything. That's why in 1954, there was a lot of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama took Rolex's watch to the Chinese leadership, and Xi Jinping's father, Xi Jinping, it seems still his death, he had that watch of the Dalai Lama. So all this was provided by the Indian traders. So this Panchil says mutual respect of each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. But the title of the Panchil Agreement is an agreement between Tibet's region of China and the Republic of China. So by the title already, India, Delhi accepted that Tibet was part of China. Therefore, mutual respect of each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty meant that India, Delhi would not be able to interfere or say anything in Tibet, despite all the rights that India had. And the third point of the five principle, mutual non-interference in each other internal affair. So much so that if you read this 15 white paper on China between 1954 and 1965, you see all the time China is quoting this Panchil agreement. They say you have no business to interfere in Tibet. Whatever India says, for example, the trade agent in Gartok or in Yatong or in Gyanse were very badly treated during the after 58, 59, especially after His Holiness left Tibet. They were all the time harassed by the Chinese, but they say, please don't interfere in internal affairs. You, like they say in their propaganda today. So that was really the end of Tibet independence. And don't rock the boat. That's very interesting sentence that the U.S. ambassador in Delhi one time asked one of his colleagues in the MEA, what is your policy on Tibet? And he said, we don't want to rock the boat. Unfortunately, that policy has gone on. What means rock the boat? Means that you don't want to change the statu quo as it is. And once the India had agreed in 1950 to the invasion of Tibet, once India had agreed in 1954 to surrendering all its right in Tibet, after that you don't rock the boat. And India's diplomacy has been very adverse to doing something strong in that way. While on the other side, you have the wolf warriors of Xi Jinping, who don't hesitate 1 second to rock the boat, or which are actually rocking the boat constantly. So I think India one day would have to rock the boat and at least say openly that Tibet was an independent state till 1954. We agree, but this also could be reviewed. But unless MEA rocks the boat once or twice, that nothing will happen much. But fortunately or unfortunately, China did mischief in Ladakh, and now for 2 years negotiations are going on. The 15th round will happen hopefully soon. But what I'm happy with is that not only the MEA is dealing and negotiating with China, but also the army and other government agency, because sometimes they have a clearer view on the ground of what is going on and what are the implications. What the MEA didn't see in 1950, in 1954 also, in 59 also, after the war in 62 also, that not rocking the boat didn't help in India's interest. And it's something strange, just to conclude, that Mr. Shumul Sinha, who had been for 2 years the head of the Indian mission in Lhasa, he was repatriated and he was giving a job as undersecretary in the MEA in charge of NIFA. And immediately in 1952, end of 52 or beginning of 53, he wrote a note for the Prime Minister, implication for NIFA of the occupation of Tibet. At that time, China was building these two roads between Sichuan and Lhasa and Qinghai and Lhasa. And slowly they were coming down to the border to Tsona and to Lunse and Rima, that Loit sector. And Mr. Shumul Sinha wrote, and the Prime Minister said, "Who is Shumul Sinha? He doesn't understand anything of our policy of peace." And he was really dejected, and he didn't quit the foreign service, but after that he asked a posting far away from Delhi, and he was quite insulted by the Prime Minister because he had pointed on the implication for India of losing the border. And it's what Patel had written or Bajpayee had written in 1950. So the independence of Tibet, Sampula has explained much better than I could the entire history since Sanzang Gompo, but it has implication for today for the border. And if India want one day to solve the border issue with China, it will have to look into this and eventually little bit rock the boat. Rock it in a very Indian way, in a gentle manner, in a compassionate manner, but both needs to be rocked a little bit. Thank you so much.
As we all expected from you as a historian, with your deep understanding of the history of Tibet, India, and China relations, you have very rightly put your finger on what kind of implications the occupation of Tibet has meant for India. And unfortunately, as you said, that India missed the boat in when China invaded Tibet, and now India is the country which is suffering more than Tibet because of China's presence in Tibet. So thank you very much for especially focusing on why the independence of Tibet is important for India. Let us hope the government of India will understand that the boat India missed is now they have to rock it one day. Let us hope it happens. And today, because our third colleague, uh, Tenzin Zochbauer, could not join us, so may I take the privilege of just filling in a few points on this subject. One very basic thing, which when we talk of Tibet's status as a free country, is the state. We are not focusing on the real history of China itself. When China claims that Tibet is a part of China, we forget what China's own history is. If I say it in very short, if you go to the history and see why the Great Wall of China was constructed, it was constructed to protect China. And it was constructed to protect China from those uh, countries and races and empires who were invading China regularly. So Chinese emperors, they took 2,300 years to build this wall around China. And the length of this wall is enormous, 21,196 kilometer long wall. And that wall, what they call Great Wall of China, is actually the shows the real size of China, which China wants to forget and which China wants the world to forget. It was before 1912 when the present day China came into existence as Republic of China. So before that, China itself was slave to the Mongolians and Manchurians. And in that period, because the Mongols they had also conquered Tibet and conquered China, and China remained a slave under these under Mongolians and Manchurians. So now today China wants to claim that because Mongols had influence in Tibet, so today Tibet should be treated as part of China. It's very interesting to note that the Chinese own history, if you look at it, for how many years? For about 784 years. 784 years, China was under the control of Mongols and Manchus. This is not something small. And the last time when Chinese had ruled China, I repeat, last time when Chinese ruled China was 296 years ago, before 1912, and that is from 1616 to 1912. China was ruled and occupied by foreign countries, foreign races called Mongols and Manchus. And today, China, as it claims, the way it has occupied slowly four countries. Uh, the very first country they occupied was after 1912, was in 1919 they occupied South Mongolia. In 1945 they occupied Manchuria to dissolve into present day China. In 1946 they occupied East Turkestan, which they named Xinjiang, to be dissolved in present day China. And in 1950 and 1951 they occupied Tibet to make today's People's Republic of China. So the way Chinese present emperor Xi Jinping is trying to claim that Tibet is part of China, he forgets that the China which he is ruling itself has been uh, not ruled by China for 784 years. And claiming, as I said earlier, that if China claims that Tibet is a part of China because the Mongols ruled Tibet, or Manchus had influence in Tibet, it is as good as saying, as India claiming another British colony, either it is Australia, as part of India, or New Zealand, claiming India as part of New Zealand because both were ruled by Britain. So today, as we see why Xi Jinping wants the world uh, to believe, uh, to accept, and to underline that Tibet is a part of China, is a part of China's imperialist game, because China knows today very well, Xi Jinping knows very well that in history Tibet was never a part of China, and that China occupied Tibet in 1950 and 1951 because China has that guilt conscience. And by international law or by international practices, uh, Tibet cannot be treated as part of China. So China today wants the world to believe its narrative that Tibet was a part of China. But unfortunately, many governments, and the most unfortunate part is the government of India, as Claude RP very nicely and very convincingly placed, that occupation of Tibet has become more problem for India than for Tibet itself. So Indian government of India is one of those governments who have underlined that it accepts Tibet as a part of People's Republic of China, which I think by international law or by any ethical standards, it's immoral stand taken by any country, especially the government of India, because neither Indian government nor the government of America or Britain or any other country, they have no authority to write off a third country's independent status to China. So I think the whole world will have to very soon realize its mistake, that by accepting Tibet as a part of China, or accepting Chinese narrative that whatever is happening inside Tibet or inside Xinjiang or South Mongolia is an internal matter of China. I think this is collaborating with a murderer. And the world must realize that by accepting Tibet Chinese narrative that Tibet is a part of China, or taking a stand on Tibet or Xinjiang, is interfering in the internal matters of China. It shows that the world is colluding with a colonial power. So these are a few things which we find on about the narrative which China is trying to build. And as Claude RP said very clearly, that it is time that Indian government, the world government, has to rock the boat, has to challenge China's narrative, has to challenge Xi Jinping's designs over the occupied countries like Tibet, East Turkestan, South Mongolia, and now Hong Kong. The world will have to stand, take a stand. And today, when we are observing, we today is the eve of the 109th anniversary of proclamation of independence of Tibet by 13th Dalai Lama. So this is the day for the world governments, for the world community to realize that they don't have to participate in a sin, in a crime committed by the government of China by accepting that Tibet is part of China, or Xinjiang is a part of China, or South Mongolia is a part of China. So, as we conclude this uh, webinar, we have our we have a few questions from the audience, and our colleague Professor Ayushi Ketkar, as always, she is with us. She will take the questions
Yes.
from the audience, and then our friend, the Tibetan Youth Congress President Gompo Dondokchi, who is with us as a co-organizer. So he will say vote of thanks. So first, we leave the floor to Ayushi Ketkar. I hope you have a few questions for the panelists.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Tashi Delek, everybody. And it's been a very interesting and insightful talk by all the speakers. Thank you, Thupten Sampella, for touching upon very important historical aspects pertaining to Tibetan independence. And Monsieur RP and Vijay sir, as usual, have been excellent when it comes to the politico-strategic issues of Tibet. Some of the questions that have come from various quarters uh, about this talk and on this topic are as follows. I'll speak out two questions at a time, which can be taken by any of the panelists. In fact, some of the questions I'm sure all the panelists would like to touch upon. As rightly mentioned by Claude RP, sir, the 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 kind of aversion that China has for the McMahon line. In fact, China treats this, it calls it unequal treaties because it treats all these colonial treaties as a colonial legacy, a baggage, which it is not willing to accept. So, in this situation, how do you think the border issues can be resolved? What do you think? What is the way out? That is one of the questions that came about by a student of defense and strategic issues. But there are some more critical issues when it comes to India Tibet relations. One of the critical issues is that China's territorial claims is mostly based on Tibetan maps. Okay. Whatever China claims to be a part of its territory, the Indian portion, which it includes, they are part of the Tibetan maps. How do you think this affects India Tibet relationship and India, in fact, the triangular relationship, India, Tibet, and China? Because we have to remember one important historical fact that there was no contingent, no delegation from Tibet on the eve of India's independence. On 15th August 1947, unfortunately, there was no Tibetan delegation to participate in India's freedom. In fact, later on many occasions, the 14th Dalai Lama has made a mention of it. He said he was too young to actually understand, to comprehend the ramifications of this aspect. But that probably a small mistake at that point of time has led to long-term consequences. And how do you see this panning out in India-Tibetan relationship, as well as for the freedom of Tibet? So, as of now, I'll stop at that.
Shall I answer?
Yes, sir. Please.
Regarding the border issue, there's two parts in the border, actually three parts. One part is the western part, which is with Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and that is Chaksambali and also let's not talk about that. But today India is facing the big problem in Ladakh. Most of that is not full, but most of this border is with Xinjiang, not with Tibet. But there's the eastern part of Ladakh, means Denchok area, was with Tibet. For this, there was a border agreement in 1684, and later on it was again mentioned in 1842 in the Treaty of Shushul, that the border which had been in existence since the king of Ladakh, Nimagon, would be respected by Tibet and by Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir. So that is, but the main border between India and Tibet is the central sector, where there is 5-6 different dispute. It is true that most of these disputes are due to the Tibetan claim in this area, in particularly Bharauti, but it's relatively minor, and I don't think there is very often clashes and solution could be found. Regarding the eastern part, means the first Sikkim, northern Sikkim, it's quite clear because it's the watershed is the border, and 23 kinds, not pillars, but kinds have been put and marked this border, and there is not very often clashes, though last year there was one in Nakula. But more or less, that's not a big problem in solving. The big problem is the McMahon line for different reasons. So that it doesn't follow always the watershed, because in 1913, when Henry McMahon sent two young captains, Morshid and Bailey, to survey that the Tibet border, they don't have very precise equipment that today we have with satellites. So there's minor adjustment to be made. I think the main issue is China has not been respecting the treaty that it signed. China had signed the 17 points agreements, His Holiness say under duress in Beijing, but even this agreement was never, the clauses were never respected by China. Later on, the 1954, I mentioned it in my presentation, most of the clauses were not respected by China. For example, the fact that the Indians could go freely to Kailash Mansarovar. Indian monks from Ladakh or from Nifa could go to study in Tibet. It was not respected. And I was very happy recently, I think 2-3 days ago, was when Dr. Jaishankar, the Indian Minister of External Affairs, said the problem in Ladakh today that China is not respecting the agreement that they had signed with India in 93, 96, in 2005, in 2010, in 2013. There's several agreements that China and India had signed after months and months of negotiation, and whenever it's convenient, China doesn't follow. So the issue is that if tomorrow, it will be very difficult, but if tomorrow you will reach a solution on the boundary, there is no proof that thereafter China will respect what they have signed. Just to give an example, in the 2000 guidelines for solving the border issue of 2005, it was agreed that the place which are uninhabited could be exchanged, but place inhabited, it means Tawang, for example, will not be disturbed. Immediately, 6 months after signing, China start claiming again Tawang. In the first time India realized this in 1958, when there was several weeks of negotiation for Baravati in the central sector in the Chamoli district of Uttarakhand, and it was agreed by both parties that uh, patrol will be allowed, but without arm. Just 6 months later, China sent armed patrol there. So regularly, since 1958, India has realized this. Whatever agreement is signed between China, so it's a huge problem to solve this thing. Regarding the map, you mentioned the maps. But if you take Mr. Chakapa, who is a very illustrious Tibetan historian as well as statesman, and he was His Holiness representative in Delhi for many years, in his map of 1962, there is no discrepancy between India's map and, of course, before 1914, the Tawang monastery would collect monastic tax till the southern border of today Arunachal Pradesh. But after that, they still continue to collect, but it was more monastic tax. And when Major Bob Ketting in February 1951 took over the administration of Tawang, that ended. But it's true that some Tibetans say that Tawang is part of China. But once I told His Holiness this, he laughed. He said that Tibetans are foolish. They didn't know in Tibet, in Lhasa, they didn't know the Kashak. They don't know that they had signed that 1914 agreement. Everyone had conveniently forgotten, including the British, actually. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, RP sir, for your vast reservoir of knowledge. It's always enlightening to hear you on these issues. Sampilla, the next question is for you. You made a mention in your talk of Angus Madison and his report, which says that India and China were the biggest economies, almost till the early 1800s. So what do you see? And you made a mention of the Silk Route and the contemporary manifestation of it in the form of the Belt Road Initiative. How do you see the economic factor and the Buddhist factor playing out? Because these are two very important factors in modern politics. So economics and religion, for that matter, Buddhism, because that's one of the fastest growing religions in the world. So how do you see economic factor and the Buddhist factor panning out when it comes to the Free Tibet movement as well as India, China, Tibet relationships?
First of all, I think with the economic factor, at one time, about 200, 300 years ago, China and India made a large portion of the world's economy. And then the British came and China was divided, British was colonized. And so China's and India's economic weight was reduced to practically nothing. So these days, I think this has been reversed. China has made really remarkable economic progress, and how this progress is filtering down to the common, hardworking Chinese people is another matter. But in terms of China's economic might, giving power, influence, and heft to the Chinese military, the Chinese Communist Party, that is really, there's no doubt about it. And with India's economic might before the colonial days was huge. It was a huge trading partner with many of the surrounding neighboring countries. And it was not only this trade, it was ideas. And one idea which struck as universal was Buddhism. So these days, I think there is an attempt, a sly, unstated attempt by China to steal Buddhism, hijack Buddhism from India to and appropriate as a means and tool of influence of the Chinese Communist Party state. Uh, this is one reason for this is that many years ago, probably I think 20 years ago, there was this Harumkar Buddhist Academy. And this academy was mm, taught and run and organized by a truly remarkable Tibetan Buddhist master called Khyampu Chingmi Pinso. And he was able to attract disciples, students from across Tibet, and not only that, from Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore. And this gave a huge jolt to the Chinese Communist Party, how one single man in remote Tibet was able to command the respect of such a huge following. And this was seen as a real grave danger to the legitimacy of Chinese Communist Party's hold uh, uh, on the on China. And at the same time, within China, people say there's a rough estimate of 150 million, or some people say the number is bigger, 400 million Chinese who are Buddhists and who follow the teachings of His Holiness, has the authentic mm, interpretation of the Buddha's message. So this kind of hold of Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism on the Chinese people is something which China perceives as a grave political danger, and they're trying to co-opt Buddhism and detach the Tibetan people from their traditional spiritual hold. So this is a really a big spiritual or political this attempt by China to hollow out Buddhism and Tibetan culture from the Tibetan people.
Thank you, sir. Vijay sir, coming to you, I would like to discuss two aspects. One is how do you see the grand narrative or the strategic thought of various countries when it comes to this entire freedom concept, the aspect of freedom. On one hand, you have the Mandala theory talking of buffer state, the importance of buffer state. And there, Tibet plays a very important, a very critical role when it comes to the security of India. On the other hand, you also have a very strong narrative in China, the Tianxia system, that is all under heaven kind of a narrative, which talks of the supremacy of China. And in that sense, then Tibet becomes almost like a vassal state, a tributary. So that how do these narratives play up, both in the psyche of people as well as the larger schema of things in the political, socio, and strategic landscape of a country?
Yeah, I'll try to give a very quick answer because we are reaching we are reaching the period of this discussion. As far as China's narrative is concerned, about whether it is on Tibet or even on countries, occupied countries like East Turkestan, South Mongolia, and even Hong Kong, the Chinese narrative is uh, they, although they, Deng Xiaoping used to say seeking truth from facts, but problem with
Mhm.
China is that as a typical Marxist, uh, you know, group, they always start with the aim, the final, what they want to achieve, and then walk back and create facts. They create history which is suitable to their present day goals. So that is a very unfortunate thing with China. They don't believe in what happened in history. They actually believe in what they want to achieve, and how now going, let us go back and write the history accordingly. So whatever their claims on Tibet, uh, on the, taking risk of repetition, China today, the only argument China has to present or justify its occupation of Tibet is their claim that Tibet was always a part of China. But in
Right.
history, they could never prove. They don't have documents. But unfortunate part of the whole story is that the whole world, whether it is the Americans or Britishers or scholars from across the world, they have relied, unfortunately, only on the Chinese scholars when it comes to knowing or presenting the history of China, or even history of Tibet and history of East Turkestan, South Mongolia, etc. Uh, we all have got used to interpreting everything from the Chinese narrative. They never bothered to see the history as written by other countries, whether it was Japan or Tibet itself or Mongolia itself, the Uyghurs themselves. Nobody ever bothered to see history from their perspective. So whatever suits China has been accepted as a gospel truth, and that is the fountainhead of the poison, which is affecting our thinking. So today, China wants to claim that Tibet is a part of China because it suits its narrative. It has occupied the present day's China has 52% plus 52% land which are occupied of foreign countries. And these countries' total population in the Chinese today's population is 2.2% only, and still they cannot tolerate the existence of the Uyghurs, their Muslim culture. They can't tolerate the culture of the Mongols in South Mongolia. They want to eradicate the identity of Tibetans. They can't tolerate these 2.2% people who are
Right.
offering more than 50% of land to their country. And more than 66% of their natural resources of China come from these occupied countries. So China has to justify this sin: occupation of these countries, colonization of these countries, destruction of the identity and culture of these countries. So that is why China is fixed on presenting its the interpretation of Tibet as a part of China, and wants the whole world to accept. So I would say, if we accept their narrative, we are participants in a sin committed by a, a, a dictator government, an imperialist government called China. So, whatever is claimed by China, I think it is time the world should have a very clear look at it, or a very sincere look at it.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for it. Just last set of questions to Monsieur RP. Sir, one, as you rightly mentioned, Panchil, born in sin, very important aspect, because that for a long, long time was the hallmark of our foreign policy. So now, do you think India is in a position to rock the boat? Even if it wants to, is it in a position? Because with things like Panchil, have we tied our own options, and have we limited ourselves to such an extent that today, even if we want to change the status quo, we are finding it difficult to do so? So one is that aspect. Second, a quick question: how do you see demographic changes playing up on the independence of Tibet? Because you see a lot of demographic change happening in Tibet. The indigenous Tibetan population is being replaced by the Chinese Han population. So how do you see that? And the final question is, I mean, with all prayers for a very long life for His Highness the Dalai Lama, where do you see this movement heading post uh, Dalai Lama? Like from complete independence to various degrees of autonomy, where do you see this oscillating in the long run? Probably 20 years, 10 years, or 20 years down the line, where do you see this? So that's the last set of questions. And one quick question which has come just recently in the chat box is, this is. There's an audience member of the audience which has said that, Cloud sir, you have mentioned about Mr. Nehru had a special liking for China. Kindly elaborate on that. So would you like to elaborate on that? So that was my last set of questions. Thank you so much. Is Cloud
Are these
sir there?
questions are for Claude?
I'm not.
Yes, Cloud.
About Nehru liking for China, I think Vijay can organize another webinar because that's too long, and he really thought that India could preserve peace. But sometimes when you want too much to preserve peace, you create more conflict and more destruction and suffering. So I will not answer that one. What are the first question? One was about demography. You know that China has built 600 or so villages. Shaokong village means moderately well-off village. Now these villages, they have created out of nowhere most of these villages. Even if some of the first villages like Yume, which is north of Persabansari district of Arunachal, there was 7 people living there in 2017. Now there's 300 people, and all of these 600 villages have brought new people. Either they have relocated the Tibetan nomads, the Dorpa, or farmers. They say Tibetan are suffering for altitude. They don't have enough oxygen. So people from area like Nachu, they will bring them to the border, which is lower. But it's very, very poor argument because Tibetan over the ages never suffered of any oxygen lack, while the Chinese soldiers in Ladakh and have really suffered the first winter about this issue. So they are projecting their own problem on the. So all these villages now they're bringing Tibetan, but they're bringing Han also. I have seen in Methok Song, which is north of Upper Siang district of Arunachal, there was a few hundred intermarriage. So all these people who come for doing roads, and you know that China is so good at doing roads, much better than India, much faster, and they have done 1.1 lakh of roads in the recent years. They are doing the new railway between Chengdu, Sichuan, and Lhasa. They have done between Ningxi and Lhasa. They are bringing people. These people they will work for 1 year, 2 year, 5 years on the contract, and many of them will settle and marry Tibetans. So there's a lot of that is very, very, very worrying. So the demography is mainly on the borders with these new villages. Some of them are inside in India territory. I will not deal with it for the next webinar of Vijay, and but this is a very serious issue for the security of India. And regarding the border, I think it's a question of muscles. And for the first time in Doklam in 2017, for 73 or 74 days, and now in Ladakh, soon it will be 2 years, India has shown that they will not move. They were surprised by the Chinese attack on 4 or 5 places in Pangong, in Galwan, in Depsang, a little bit in Demchok also, or in Kogra. the first few weeks they were surprised, but India stood by China militarily. I think it's the first time that China India stood. Now the negotiation will take time. Negotiation ultimately will result in fixing some sort of LAC, line of actual control in Ladakh, but it will take more than the 14 rounds which have taken place so far. And but it will not solve the boundary issue. But the fact of having military stood by the PLA. And you know what happened in Galwan on 15 June on Xi Jinping's birthday? There was a big clash, and more than 40 Chinese lost their life. So this is the first, and hopefully it indicates that India is serious about uh, not rocking the boat, but first standing on the border and not being bullied like it had been done in the past to just for the sake of avoiding a bigger conflict. More you want to avoid the conflict and more you want to give away to the bully, more the bully will take from you. China is a bully.
Yeah. So, so I think this is time to conclude the question answers. Thank you, Ayushi, for your presentation of questions. Uh, we have our co-organizer, Tibetan Youth Congress President, Mr. Gopo Dhundup, who is a prominent Tibetan leader. And as all of us know, the Tibetan Youth Congress is not only the largest socio-political organization of Tibetan diaspora, it is one of the, I would say, most focused organization which knows its goal, which knows its purpose, and which has shown unity and leadership to the Tibetan diaspora. And as a friend and observer of Tibetan Youth Congress for last 50 years, I can share with all of our audience that Tibetan Youth Congress has emerged as the real nursery of leadership among the Tibetan diaspora. What we see today across the world, the Tibetan activity, the Tibet's success in presenting its narrative across the world and fighting for the cause of Tibet, a big credit goes to Tibetan Youth Congress. So our co-host, Mr. Gompo, is with us, the Tibetan Youth Congress president. So Gompo Dhundupji would present vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Vijayji, for your elaborate intro. So, Tashitile and warm greetings to all the speakers, moderators, and all the online participants. So, before I extend my word of thanks, I want to add few words on this very important topic that Tibet was never part of China. So, this virtual webinar is jointly organized by Tibetan Youth Congress and Himalaya Center for Himalaya Asia Engagement and Studies. So, as Vijayji have already highlighted, our motive for organizing this webinar. So, since formation of so-called this People Republic of China, they illegally occupied Tibet for last 6 decades. They use every way and means to change the history and to silence the voice of innocent, voiceless Tibetan people, but they are not successful in their sinful acts. For last 6 decades, both the Tibetan and Tibetan inside and outside Tibet, we carried out all the resistance movement, and we are continuously carried all this resistance movement until our core objective is restored. As the organization Tibetan Youth Congress, one of our core objective is to restore and to seek a complete independence of Tibet with the non-violent strategic goal. So the Tibet independence is not only relevant for the existence of Tibetan identity, but it's also relevant for the security and stability of all the free nation. So with the unique strategic and geographical location of Tibet, now the China is using all the means to extend their expansionist policy, They are creating a trouble in all the neighboring countries, including the India, where the Tibet and India share more than 3,000 something kilometers in all the Himalayan belt. So Tibet independence is not only for the Tibet issue, but it's also relevant for the security and stability of all the free nations of this world. So we must come together. We must, all the free nations must support, including the India must support the Tibet call for independent Tibet. So I'm very thankful as a co-organizer of this webinar. I'm very thankful for our two eminent speakers, uh, Cloud Arpi and Kumar Thupten Sambela, for sharing their expertise. And this, all the discussion is very useful. Today we got enough kind of online participant. Moreover, this video will be recorded as in a TYC and the Vijay Krantiji, the Chase Facebook and the YouTube. All the interested audience can check and go through, and that would be very useful for all the interested audience whenever they whenever they have wanted to watch, they can easily access on Facebook and the YouTube. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation and sharing your expertise on this very important and the very relevant topic. And I also want to thank former TYC Central Executive Member and the current Minister of Security, Kumo Geridomala, for being as a special audience of this important webinar. And I also would like to thank Mr. Vijay Krantiji, a very, very long time friend and supporter of Tibet and a very close friend of TYC, for organizing, for managing, for bulldozing all this important the virtual program that we are having here. So Vijayji, I'm very thankful for hosting, for moderating, for organizing. For as a co-organizer, I want to thank you for all your expert and professional work. And I also want to thank Professor Ayushi Ketkar for her expert in dealing with all the question and answer in a very professional way. So I'm very much thankful, Professor, for your experts. And I have finally, last but not least, I want to thank Lobsang Sedanla from the Tibet Action Institute for helping us in doing all this technical work. So thank you very much all. And finally, my greetings and thank you for all the audience for showing interest and listening this important virtual panel discussion. So there's no death in human spirit for seeking an independence. So we will continue to do all our resistant activity. So we'll continue to carry out all the campaign work until our core objective of restoring complete independence is fulfilled and achieved. Tashit, thank you and Bergelu to all. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gompola. And as we conclude today's event, I uh, jointly, on behalf of all of us, send greetings to the people of Tibet, the Tibetan diaspora, and especially people living inside Tibet on tomorrow's anniversary, 109th anniversary of reassertion of Tibet's independence by 13th Dalai Lama in 1913. And let us hope and pray that very soon Tibet achieves its independence, and we are all very soon we celebrate the reassertion and reinstatement of Tibetan's independence. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll come very soon with another webinar, hopefully on 18th next week on Genocide Olympics. So we see you again next week. Thank you very much for joining us. So I, Vijay Kranti, now sign off. Thank you very much.